back to the channel. My name is Todd Roderick, and I'm the Confused Wanderer. In today's video, I'm going to begin to cover third density. Third density, the subject is probably going to take quite a few videos to get through because there's a lot of details, especially since I feel like it's the most important density that we cover thoroughly because third density is where we are right now on this planet. If you haven't already watched my first two videos covering first density and second density, I recommend you go back and watch those so you can get up to speed on the evolutionary cycles of the first and second density and understand how the experiences in those densities move us into the third density cycle. Ra calls third density the density of choice. And you might ask, well, what is that? What is that choice? And that's a really important question to have answer. What is the choice that we're meant to make in our third density cycle? Ra says that choice is how we choose to serve the one infinite creator. Now, those choices that we make during all of our incarnations during the 75,000 year cycle of third density, those choices, whether those choices are conscious or unconscious, those choices move us, or what Ra calls polarize us, in one direction or the other. And it's all about how we choose to serve. Are we going to choose service to self, which they call the negative path, or are we going to choose to serve others, which is the positive path? And that's what this density is all about. Us exercising our free will choice to polarize ourselves towards the positive or towards the negative. And so through all of our different lifetimes being incarnated here during the third density cycle, and like I said, the third density cycle lasts approximately 75,000 years long and will go one life after the next, being reincarnated again and again and again during that 75,000 year cycle. And during each incarnation, our choices are going to pull us in one direction or the other, whether it's towards the service to self or service to others, either towards a positive or negative. But there's also something else that Ra says is falling in the gray area in between. So you could go through a whole 75,000 year third density cycle and haven't polarized strongly in the positive or the negative. And what that means is that you would have to redo a whole another third density cycle. And they call that falling in the gray area in between. And it's good to understand that during this polarization, it's not about at the end of the cycle being judged whether you were good or bad or positive or negative. This is about a frequency change. This is about how you deal with utilizing your energy centers, because your energy centers are affected by your conscious choices or even your unconscious choices. So it's not that you're being judged by the one infinite creator when you're done with your third density cycle saying, well, you're good or you're positive, you're negative. It's about that's the reason behind the polarization is there's no higher being that's going to be judging you at the end of your 75,000 year cycle. It's all up to you. It's your responsibility to polarize in either direction. You're making conscious choices and decide where you end up going at the end of your third density cycle, because eventually what Ra calls graduation, you eventually at the end of your third density cycle, if you polarize, whether positive or negative, and don't fall in the gray area in between, that's going to determine where you go on your fourth density cycle. It's a whole other section that I'll get into later, but third density is about making choices, and those choices help you to energetically polarize or vibrationally polarize to go one direction or the other. And it's going to take a whole, at least one 75,000 year cycle to polarize to go either negative or positive during your next cycle. It's not a judgment. It's your way of choosing how you're going to serve the one infinite creator during your next cycle. The veil. It's another unique aspect of third density. And what the veil means is that when we enter into third density, we have a veil over our consciousness. Before we were in third density, for instance, let's say second density entities don't have their consciousness veiled. They can see, they have their natural, spiritual, subtle perceptions intact. Now, since they don't have an established self-awareness, they can't do much with that other than use that awareness to guide them in their decisions of survival. So they can read people's energetic bodies. For instance, if you have a pet, if you have a dog or a cat, or it could be a horse, you'll notice how they can sense people's intentions, whether they're a threat or not a threat. And so that goes to their ability to be able to read more subtle energies. Also, they have a natural connection to the earth. They have a natural connection to weather cycles and the threat of possibly like natural disasters and things like that, is because they have this natural intuitive connection to the environment around them. And that's because their consciousness is not veiled. Now, when we enter third density, our consciousness is veiled. No longer can we sense the real from the unreal. Let me go into just briefly into yogic philosophy terms. In the Yoga Sutras, they talk about the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha would be the unchanging, the aspect of absolute truth. Prakriti would be something that has a birth, a life, and a death, something that's dynamic and constantly changing. Now, when our consciousness is veiled, we have a hard time in distinguishing the real from the unreal. And that's because we have a veil over our consciousness. And Ross says what that veil does is it potentiates our choices, our free will choices, when our consciousness is veiled. So it causes more of an impact. Our choices cause more of an impact when we experience a separation from the creator. Because basically, at the end of the day, that's what it does. It creates a false disconnect between ourselves and other selves. And because of that disconnect, it creates a larger impact in the polarization of our choices. And that's an important aspect of third density. Picture this. You want to imagine that there's a staircase, and that staircase leads one through third density. As you climb that staircase, each step is a different frequency, moving you closer to the end of third density and into the next density. But as you reach the top of those steps, there's a threshold. And that threshold is really hard to cross from third density to fourth density. It's like a wall. And you have to have a certain frequency set through your choices. And like I talked about, the polarization between positive and negative, because there's a split once you move into fourth density. And fourth density, that split is either into service to self or service to others. And so without the potentiator of the
This episode
veil.
today is brought to you by Fusion Body Studio. If you're watching this show today, you're obviously into spirituality. But if you're not exercising, you're not on the right path, because spirituality starts in the body. Fusion Body Studio is female owned and operated. And at Fusion Body Studio, they take all the traditional teachings of the East and merge it into modern day exercises. Right now, Fusion Body Studio is running a special. If you use promo code AYA20, you'll get 20% off your first 6 months at Fusion Body Studio. With tuition already cheap, this is a deal you can't pass up. All information is in the description box below.
It would be very difficult, if not impossible, for us to cross that threshold into the choice between polarizing positive and negative. So that veil separates us, gives us a false separation from the creator. So it isolates us. So we no longer can see other selves as part of ourself, because at the end of the day, we're all the same. We all come from the same creator. But with that separation, that creates some tension there. And that tension is what creates the potentiator. And so we feel isolated and separate from other people. And so through that separation, our choices, whether to serve others or ourselves, matter that much more. Because if it wasn't for that separation, there wouldn't be the power behind our choices. Another thing about the veil that Ra says is that the veil keeps us from truly knowing the mysteries of the universe. And so Ra says that this is not the density, third density is not the density of knowing. And for me, that came as a big relief. Someone that came from the yogic studies that I've come from, I had realized that what Ra was saying and what my studies were revealing were pretty much exactly the same. In the Yoga Sutras, which is my main form of study and what really educates me on my practices and reading the raw material and Ra's perspective or Ra's information that they were giving on third density completely sync up. What the Yoga Sutras are telling you is to be in your body and to be as human as possible and to ground into that body, to also understand that we live in the illusion, we live in Maya. And like Ra is saying, is the exact same thing, is that in third density, since our consciousness is veiled and there is this separation between us and the creator, and between seeing other selves different from ourselves, and also dealing with the mental challenges of being in Maya, not knowing the difference between the real and the unreal. And in the Yoga Sutras, they talk about the Purusha and the Prakriti. And it's the same exact thing. And so for me, the big relief was what Ra was saying about our third density is exactly what the Yoga Sutras were saying. So it seemed like to me that the Yoga Sutras were basically a handbook for dealing with third density life. And so, we could take that further, but I'm going to just leave it there in that the important thing to take from this is that we live with a veil, we live in Maya, the illusion, and the important thing to do is to be as human as possible, to ground into the human body, to take good care of the human body, and also to learn to observe your mind and how your mind functions within the illusion. We have the veil. And since this is not the density of knowing, we're just here to make a conscious choice. Because remember, we just came from the second density, the density of plants and animals. So we're just fledgling spiritual beings during this third density cycle, just here to make a choice, just here to learn our first experience with exercising our free will. And we're given 75,000 years through many lifetimes. All we have to do is to make a choice. And remember when I said that choice is either to serve others or to serve the self. And I'm going to go into that a lot more in the next episode about what it means to be service to self or service to others and why that's important. And also I'm going to go into where we go after third density and how that choice that we make during our third density cycle is going to send us in one of two directions in fourth density, and why there is that split. Because it's important to understand that. And it's also important to understand the mechanisms behind service to self and service to others. But now we're just laying the groundwork with the veil and what that veil keeps us from experiencing and why we have that veil and how it potentiates our choice, which is an important part of this, as well as where we've come from and how we got here. And then I could start getting into some of the finer details. Some other stuff I'm going to touch on in future episodes are the three types of humans here. There's three different types, and I'll go over each of those types because it's very important, in my opinion, to understand those three types. So I'll go over that in the next episode. I'll also go over service to self, service to others, and the details behind that. And then we can start getting into, because it's good to also understand where it is that we're headed, not just what comes after third density, but also where we're headed on this planet at the end of our third density cycle. Because as Ra explains, and you got to take all this with a grain of salt. I take everything in the raw material with a grain of salt, and that's why I'm spending this time trying to simplify this for you, so you don't even have to really read all this material, because it's hard to get through, and there is a lot of extraneous stuff that I feel like isn't important at all and isn't really going to help you. For one, because this is not the density of knowing, and the questioners that were questioning Ra, really didn't fully understand this. And there's some other details that I'll eventually get into with my opinions on the channelers and the material itself. And then we're going to move into some other material that is really going to sort of shake things up a little bit. But first, just getting the foundation, simplifying this stuff for you, pushing out all the extraneous stuff into a very easy to understand perspective on where we are at this time on our planet in these bodies. Yeah, so that wraps up this video. Thank you for joining me. I really enjoy covering this material, and I'm really looking forward to creating more content and going in deeper into the raw material, and also sort of eventually shifting off into some other really important material that's going to bring all this together. And I hope you'll stick around and join me for the journey, to allow me to share my opinions and everything I know on this really unique perspective on our life as spiritual beings in this universe. Until next time, thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in my next episode.